Welcome back to Crime Time, Inc. And today we are reviewing the third of 4 Reith lectures from the BBC by forensic psychiatrist Dr. Gwynne Adshead.
Oh, this one was really something.
Yeah.
This lecture, Does Trauma Lead to Violence?
Okay.
It was recorded live at Grendon Prison.
Grendon Prison, wow.
Yeah, a first for the Reith lectures.
So for listeners who maybe aren't familiar with Grendon, what is it exactly?
It's not your typical prison.
Right.
It's in Buckinghamshire. It's this therapeutic facility housing around 200 men.
Okay.
Many of them are serving life sentences for serious crimes, like murder.
Wow. So Dr. Adshead is giving this lecture on violence.
Surrounded by people who've committed acts of violence.
I mean, that's got to be...
Very intense.
Yeah, pretty intense to think about.
Yeah.
And the audience, this is interesting too, the audience included prisoners from Grendon itself.
Yeah, really facing her subject matter head on.
Yeah.
She kicks off the lecture by bringing up a case that I think a lot of true crime fans will remember.
Okay.
The Menendez brothers.
The Menendez brothers. Oh, yeah. The
abuse excuse.
The abuse excuse, that's right. So back in 1994...
Lyle and Eric Menendez.
Right.
They shot and killed their parents.
In their Beverly Hills mansion.
Right.
And their defense was...
PTSD. From
years of abuse. And they said that's what led them to commit the murders.
Right.
But of course, the prosecution argued that PTSD doesn't automatically equal violence.
Right. And most people with PTSD, they never harm anyone.
Right.
That's a point that Dr. Adshead kind of comes back to throughout the lecture.
Okay.
She actually shares a story about one of her patients.
Okay.
A guy named Kevin.
Kevin.
Who killed and raped an elderly woman when he was just 19.
19, gosh.
And during therapy, he asked this really powerful question.
Okay, what was it?
He said, most people who are abused as children don't go on to do what I did. Why?
It's true. So it challenges this idea that abuse equals future violence.
Exactly.
Which we know isn't always the case.
Right.
There's a lot of factors that contribute.
Nuances.
Right, nuances.
Different paths.
And this is where the ACE study comes in.
The ACE study.
Which Dr. Adshead talks about.
Yeah, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study.
Right, which really shed light on the long-term impacts of childhood trauma.
Yeah, it was groundbreaking.
Okay.
And it wasn't just about direct abuse either.
No.
They looked at a whole range of adverse experiences.
Okay.
Neglect, parental separation, having a parent who's struggling with mental illness or substance abuse.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They gave 17,000 people a checklist. They asked them to indicate which ACEs they had experienced.
Okay, interesting.
And what they found was that the more ACEs someone had experienced, the more likely they were to have all these health problems later in life.
Health problems like what?
Heart disease, lung disease, liver disease, you name it.
Things that you wouldn't really connect to childhood experiences.
Exactly. Like liver disease, it's wild.
Yeah.
It really shows just how pervasive the impact trauma can have on your life.
Absolutely, yeah.
10% of the people in that study, they experienced 4 or more ACEs.
10%, that's a lot.
That's huge. That's a significant chunk of the population.
Yeah.
Carrying the weight of those early experiences.
Right.
And then on the flip side, the 30% who said they had no childhood adversity, much better health outcomes.
Across the board.
Across the board.
So, I mean, it really underscores the importance of a stable and nurturing environment for kids.
Oh, absolutely.
But, okay, let's get into the science a bit. How does this early trauma affect us?
Well, Dr. Adshead, she talks about some really interesting biological mechanisms at play.
Okay.
One of the key things she discusses is the impact of chronic stress on a developing brain.
Okay.
So when a child experiences repeated trauma, their stress response system, it's constantly on high alert.
Like their body's always in fight or flight mode.
Exactly. And all those stress hormones, like cortisol, they can damage the developing brain.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
It affects those areas responsible for things like emotional regulation, impulse control, even memory.
Oh, wow.
And then there's epigenetics, which is fascinating.
Okay, break that down for us a little bit. What is epigenetics?
It's like a dimmer switch for your genes.
A dimmer switch, okay.
Trauma can actually dim or brighten the expression of certain genes.
Oh, wow.
Affecting everything, like your stress response, your mental health.
So our experiences are literally changing our biology.
It's wild.
Yeah, it really is. It's mind-blowing to think that what we go through as kids can impact us so fundamentally, even down to our genes.
Yeah.
Dr. Adshead gives this really powerful example of how stress experienced by pregnant women can actually affect the genetic expression of stress hormones in their unborn babies,
Yeah, it's amazing.
making those babies more sensitive to stress.
For their whole lives.
Their whole lives, wow. It's crazy.
It highlights that interconnectedness of our biology and our environment.
Right. From there, Dr. Adshead kind of moves into the psychological impacts of trauma.
Yeah.
How it affects our sense of self and our relationships.
A big part of that is secure attachment. That bond we form with our caregivers early in life.
Right.
Which gives us a sense of safety and belonging.
It's like knowing someone's always got your back.
Right.
No matter what. That feeling of being loved and worthy of love.
Exactly.
Right.
Secure attachment helps us develop a healthy sense of self.
Okay.
And it gives us the tools to navigate relationships.
But when that attachment is disrupted,
yeah,
say by abuse or neglect,
huge impact.
It can really affect our ability to connect with others and manage our emotions.
Totally.
Dr. Adshead uses this term, mentalizing.
Mentalizing.
To describe the ability to understand our own minds and the minds of others.
Yeah, that's crucial for social interaction.
It is, yeah.
It lets us interpret people's intentions, understand their perspectives, react appropriately.
It's like how you can usually tell if someone's joking or being serious.
Exactly.
Just by like their tone of voice or body language.
Right.
That's mentalizing.
Mentalizing in action.
But trauma can really mess with our ability to do that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
For someone who's experienced trauma, those signals, they get all jumbled.
Right, so you might misunderstand things.
Exactly, misinterpretations.
Right.
Which can lead to, in some cases, violence.
Dr. Adshead gives this example of a young man who beat an older man to death after being reprimanded for something really minor. It shows how this lack of mentalizing ability, the difficulty regulating emotions,
can have tragic outcomes.
Yeah, it really can.
It's a stark reminder of how trauma can shape behavior, but it's important to remember what Dr. Adshed's saying. Trauma is not a life sentence. Just because you experience trauma doesn't mean you're destined to become violent. Most people who experience trauma never do.
So what are some of the factors that might protect someone from going down that path?
Well, Dr. Adshead, she points to things like strong social connections,
Okay.
community support,
Right.
a sense of belonging.
Like having people there for you.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Those things can help buffer the negative impacts of trauma
Okay.
and give you a sense of hope and purpose.
She also discusses some research findings about the types of trauma.
Yeah.
Physical abuse more than any other form.
Seems to have a strong link to violence later in life.
It seems like physical violence maybe has a unique impact on how aggression and violent behavior develop.
Right, although more research is needed to really understand it fully.
Yeah, of course. There's so much to unpack here.
So much.
Dr. Adshead raises some really interesting questions about the role of gender in all of this.
Oh, yeah, that part was really interesting.
Yeah.
She points out that statistically, men are much more likely to be perpetrators of violence than women.
Right.
But boys and girls, they experience similar levels of abuse.
So why the discrepancy?
That's a great question.
Yeah. Is it nature? Is it nurture?
Maybe a bit of both.
Yeah, probably.
Dr. Adshead suggests that gender roles and societal expectations,
Okay.
they might play a part.
So are boys socialized in a way that makes them more likely to express their trauma through violence?
And are girls more likely to internalize it?
Yeah.
These are really complex questions.
Yeah, with no easy answers.
Nope.
She also asked about individuals who haven't experienced any significant childhood adversity.
Yeah.
Like, what makes them so lucky?
Right. Could their lack of exposure to trauma actually be a liability
Interesting.
in some ways?
Maybe it leads to a lack of understanding and empathy for those who have suffered.
It's a perspective I hadn't really considered before. It's a reminder that even the absence of something can have its own unique impact.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm really curious to hear about this Q&A session with the prisoners at Grendon. What was it like to have this discussion inside a prison?
Yeah, it was interesting.
With men who have committed violent crimes, did they engage with the topic?
Yeah, they did.
Okay, good.
The recording includes a Q&A with both Dr. Adshead and some of the prisoners.
Okay, well, I love a good Q&A.
Me too.
So let's jump right in and see what they had to say.
Let's do it. So the Q&A kicks off with the host,
Okay.
Anita Anand.
Right.
She's setting the scene.
Okay.
She reminds listeners about the sensitive nature of this discussion,
Right.
emphasizing that they're not going to be asking the prisoners for their names
Right.
or specifics about their offenses
Which makes sense, yeah.
to avoid causing any distress stress to victims.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Wait, these are real people.
Real people with real stories.
Real victims out there. So it's super important to approach this whole conversation with sensitivity.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And introduces the governor of Grendon Prison, Olivia Phelps.
Olivia Phelps, okay.
And the head of clinical services, Richard Schucker.
Okay.
Give us a bit of background on Grendon.
Okay, so what makes Grendon so different from other prisons?
Well, first of all, it's voluntary.
Voluntary.
Prisoners have to apply to be transferred there.
Wow, okay.
And once they're there, they participate in this intensive program of therapy.
Okay.
Including group therapy 3 days a week.
3 days a week? Wow, that's intense.
Yeah, it is.
Oh.
They also have responsibilities within the prison community.
Okay.
Holding roles, being accountable for their behavior.
So it's like a totally different approach to incarceration.
Right. It's not just about punishment.
It's about
rehabilitation.
Understanding the root causes of behavior.
Exactly.
Right.
But you can imagine
Yeah.
this level of self-reflection. It's tough.
Yeah.
Schucker mentions that the attrition rate at Grendon is around 25%.
25%, so a quarter of the prisoners who start the program
end up leaving before completing it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty high.
It is. It really speaks to the difficulty of the work they're doing there.
It really shows the commitment and courage it takes.
To face those inner demons.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I want to hear from the prisoners themselves. What kinds of questions did they ask Dr. Adshead?
One that stood out to me was from a prisoner in Day Wing.
Okay.
He asked about the impact of witnessing violence between parents as a child.
Oh, wow.
He wanted to know if seeing that kind of violence could have like a lasting impact.
I mean, it's a question that unfortunately a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah.
Growing up in a home with domestic violence can be incredibly traumatic.
Dr. Adshead acknowledges the research that shows that children who witness domestic violence are at a higher risk of becoming perpetrators themselves.
Okay, yeah.
But she also highlights that for these kids, it's rarely just a one-time thing.
Right.
They're often living in this constant state of fear and anxiety.
Yeah, you're always on edge.
Right. And that kind of chronic exposure,
Yeah.
it can seriously impact their developing brains.
So it's not just about witnessing a single act of violence.
Right.
It's the whole environment.
A constant threat.
That makes sense.
She even brings up how parenting styles can change over time.
Oh, interesting.
Parents might not, interact with their second or third child the same way they did with their first.
Right.
So even within the same family,
Yeah.
those early experiences, they can vary.
It's an important point. There's no simple formula for how trauma affects a person.
Nope.
Okay.
Another prisoner from B Wing asked a question that I found really interesting.
Okay.
He mentioned that he'd grown up in this hostile and traumatic environment with 3 younger sisters.
Okay.
And his sisters, they'd all become law-abiding citizens.
Right.
But he'd turned to crime.
Wow.
And he wanted to understand, why they had ended up on such different paths.
That's a great question.
It is.
What did Dr. Adshead say?
She admitted that it's a complex question.
Right.
No easy answers. But she wondered if there might be something about their experience, as females, that acted as a protective factor for his sisters.
So do you think she was implying that girls are just naturally better at coping with trauma?
No, I don't think that's what she was getting at. I think she was alluding to the possibility that girls are often socialized differently.
Okay.
Perhaps in ways that give them better coping mechanisms.
Right. Like maybe they're encouraged to talk about their feelings more.
Exactly. Or maybe they had stronger support networks.
Yeah, could be.
It also ties back into the question she raised earlier about why men are statistically more likely to become perpetrators of violence.
Even though they experience similar levels of abuse as girls growing up?
Right. Maybe it is the way we define masculinity and femininity as a society.
That plays a role in all of this.
Yeah, possibly. It's a lot to consider. But I think what really struck me about the whole Q&A was how open and reflective the prisoners seemed to be.
Yeah, they were really engaging with these complex ideas, weren't they?
Yeah, they were really grappling with their own experiences.
Yeah, I thought so too. It's powerful to hear their voices.
It is. One prisoner explained that he chose to be at Grendon because he desperately needed to understand why he had committed his crime. He said he hadn't learned anything in other prisons.
Wow.
But at Grendon, he was being challenged to confront his past
Right.
and figure out the root causes of his behavior.
So it sounds like he found the process incredibly difficult, but ultimately rewarding.
Yeah, he did describe it as the toughest thing he'd ever done.
Wow.
but also the most valuable. He talked about being in a group with other men
Right.
who'd committed similar offenses.
Right.
It helped him to see himself more clearly.
Okay, yeah.
And start to take responsibility for his actions.
That makes sense.
It must be really powerful to be in that kind of therapeutic environment.
Yeah, where you can be truly honest with yourself and with others.
Totally.
Yeah.
Did anyone talk about any specific therapeutic approaches that they found helpful?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. One prisoner shared that art therapy was a turning point for him.
Art therapy, okay.
He explained that it gave him a way to express his emotions and process his trauma without having to rely on words.
Oh, I can see how art could be incredibly powerful,
Yeah.
especially for someone who finds it difficult to put their experiences into words.
Right.
Okay.
Another prisoner talked about how vital honesty and trust were within the group.
Okay.
He said that by sharing his trauma
Yeah.
and being willing to listen to other people's stories,
Right.
he was able to start healing
Okay.
and develop compassion
Compassion for.
himself and for the other men.
It really highlights the importance of human connection in the healing process.
It really does. I think it shows how the group dynamic at Grendon plays such a crucial role in that therapeutic process.
It's creating that sense of shared understanding and support
Exactly.
so they can confront their pasts and work toward positive change. It's really inspiring to hear about the transformative potential of this approach.
It is. But, as we mentioned before, Grendon is unique.
Yeah.
There aren't many places like it.
Right. So during the Q&A, Anand asked Governor Phelps,
Yeah.
why aren't there more prisons like Grendon?
That's a great question, and I was really curious to hear Phelps' response.
Me too. What did she say?
She explained that it comes down to resources.
Resources. Okay.
It's a really intensive program
Right.
and expensive.
Right.
And she acknowledged that not everyone in the prison system would be ready for this kind of work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
She also pointed out that prisons, they have different purposes.
Right. They do.
Not every facility needs to be a Grendon.
That's true.
Right.
Not everyone would thrive in that kind of environment.
Right.
And we still need prisons that focus on other aspects of the criminal justice system.
Exactly.
But while Grendon might not be the answer for every inmate, it's clear that it's making a profound difference in the lives of those who are able to participate.
It really is. So before we move on, I just have one last question about Grendon.
Okay.
What happens to the prisoners after they leave? Do they go back to a regular prison?
That's a good question.
Anon asked Dr. Adshead that same question.
Okay.
And Adshead explained that, it wasn't really her area of expertise,
Right.
but she believed that the time spent at Grendon
Yeah.
could make the transition back to a regular prison easier.
Oh, how so?
She suggested that increased self-awareness, understanding of others' minds that they develop at Grendon, it might equip them with the skills to avoid conflict,
Okay.
navigate the complexities of life back in a regular prison.
So even though they're returning to a more restrictive setting,
They're armed with these new tools
and insights that can help them cope.
and make better choices.
Exactly. It's a hopeful thought.
It is.
It shows the power of rehabilitation
Yeah.
and the possibility of change even for those who have committed serious crimes.
Yeah.
It's incredible to hear about the positive changes that are happening at Grendon, but it makes you wonder why this approach isn't more common.
It does raise questions about, our whole approach to criminal justice in general.
Right. What if we shifted our focus
From punishment to rehabilitation.
and really try to understand the underlying causes of crime?
Exactly.
What if we invested more in these kinds of therapeutic interventions,
And support systems.
like the ones at Grendon?
It would be a huge shift, that's for sure.
Yeah. But I think it comes back to this idea that people can change,
Yeah.
even after committing serious crimes.
Right. That's such a powerful message, especially in the world of true crime.
Right.
We tend to focus so much on the darkest aspects of human behavior.
And Dr. Adshead, she really drives that point home at the end of her lecture,
Yeah.
emphasizing that even small changes
Especially in self-compassion.
and connecting with others,
Yeah.
they can have a huge impact.
It's a message that kind of echoes throughout the whole lecture.
Right.
And that Q&A session with the prisoners.
It's a reminder that change is possible, even in, the most challenging circumstances.
Absolutely.
And that these small acts of kindness and understanding, they can really create a ripple effect.
It really can. It made me think about how we, as true crime enthusiasts,
Yeah,
engage with these stories.
that's a really good point. So
Yeah.
what does all this mean for us?
Yeah.
For those of us who are, captivated by true crime, but also grappling with these complex questions about human behavior.
I think it challenges us to look beyond the headlines and those sensationalized stories.
To see the humans.
In both the victims and the perpetrators.
And to understand, like, the complex web of factors that contribute to violence. And maybe even, consider alternative approaches to justice and rehabilitation.
It's a call to empathy.
Yeah.
And action.
Yeah, it's about remembering that while we may never fully comprehend the darkness that leads some people to commit these terrible acts,
right,
we can strive to create a world where those acts are less likely to happen in the first place. As always, it will be interesting to hear what Simon and Tom think about this. But in the meantime, tune in tomorrow for another great true crime episode.